Hello and welcome to another Pauper Commander review. I am Darcy Bits, and today I'm counting down my top 10 picks for new Pauper Commanders from Aetherdrift. As always, Pauper Commander is played with 99 commons in your deck and 1 uncommon creature in your command zone. No need for it to be legendary. This gives us some interesting things to look at in the new set, and usually we have to play around the new set mechanics a lot. Oftentimes, new sets have new mechanics that look really interesting, but don't have enough support when you're playing a 100 card singleton format of only commons. For Aetherdrift, the new set mechanics are start your engines or speed and exhaust. Both of these do have support pieces throughout the entire set, but mostly exist on their own, functioning just fine. This means that anything that has one of those mechanics could be a viable commander, but it still means that anything that cares about the mechanic might struggle. For example, the Boom Scholar is a 2-color commander option that specifically says that your exhaust abilities cost 2 less to activate, which would be a fantastic effect if there were enough exhaust abilities at common in their 2 colors, but probably not strong enough on its own to be your commander. With that said, let's start counting down the top 10 Pauper Commanders for Aetherdrift. Number 10, Calaxion Hunger Tyrant. Or more accurately, the entire cycle of monocolored vanilla legends. This set attempted to do a little bit with Vanilla Matters. I personally think they could have done more with it, but that's neither here nor there. Now, none of these are super interesting because they are just vanilla, but they do have these extreme stats, oftentimes very high power or toughness with very low toughness or power. If you could find a way to take advantage of having your commander be able to come down and immediately satisfy this high power or high toughness, that could be really interesting. My pick is Calaxion because they are dramatically higher power than anything else you could put in the command zone. And I think Celadon has some potential because of its toughness, but the rest are a lot shakier. Specifically, I don't even recommend at all the mono white one. This one doesn't actually push the envelope, it's just a 2-mana 3/3, which seems okay until you realize that things like Watch Wolf are a 2-mana 3/3 already, but they're 2 colors, so we just prefer to use that. So while the others are really holding their own, and even if the vanilla creature isn't good enough, it's still doing something unique. But Sundial Dawn Tyrant is just far and away worse than another commander option. Number 9, Sabotage Strategist. Sabotage Strategist is a 4-mana 2/2 Vedalken Ranger with flying and vigilance. It says whenever one or more creatures attack you, those creatures get -1/-0 until end of turn. It also has an exhaust ability of 7 mana, put 3 +1/+1 counters on this creature. Now, that exhaust ability is pretty dramatic. I don't expect you're going to use it much, but you might. It's a 4-mana 2/2 that you can then sink an additional 7 mana into to turn into a 5/5. With flying and vigilance, those stats are reasonable, and if you end up in a grindy board state that you just need to get a beater out, it could be good enough. But really, we're looking at this card as a flying vigilant 2/2, which is already good stats, plus whenever one or more creatures attack you, those creatures get -1/-0. Now, there's a few cards that have this effect that are competitor commanders that we could look at. There's even Mind Whisker from Bloomborough, which at the time I did put in the top 10, but I said that the -1/-0 effect was more of a bonus and not really why you play it. The difference is that Sabotage Strategist has the -1/-0 from the get-go. There's no jumping through hoops. You don't have to turn on Threshold to make it happen. It also has the sneaky upside of it only triggering when a creature attacks you. This means in a multiplayer game, your opponents might be encouraged to attack each other just so that they don't have that lowered power. It is worth pointing out that if you are attacking your opponents, they don't get that minus, so you aren't getting that benefit on the offense. So it's not just strictly better, but it does have this interesting upside in the multiplayer format that I think is really worth considering. Number 8, Sky Serpent Seeker. Sky Serpent Seeker is a 2-mana green and blue 1/1 snake with flying and death touch. It also has an exhaust ability of 4 generic for reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal 2 land cards. Put those land cards onto the battlefield tapped, and the rest on the bottom of the library in a random order. Put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. What this is for us is a ramp spell in the command zone. For 6 mana, you can cast it and activate the exhaust to get this effect. That's a lot to ramp 2 lands, admittedly, but if you can play it for 2 and have it stick on the board until your next turn and then activate it for 4, that's actually pretty good. Yes, there's a bit of a hoop to jump through. It does die to single damage ping, so it might be a bit more awkward than it seems, but a flying Death Toucher in the command zone is already just really nice. Now, exhaust abilities are one-time activated effects that remind me a lot of Sacrifice, actually. A lot of people are comparing it to Monstrosity, and that is a very good comparison, but we don't see that very often. So instead, think of it as an ability that says, sacrifice this creature, do something. It's a one-time effect, except you don't have to sacrifice them. In fact, in this case, it's getting even stronger. I think it mostly has to compete with other ramp spells in the command zone, Mana Dorks, for example, or ones that ETB and bring in a land. Compared to Mana Dorks, this has the upside of not needing to be tapped down when you want to use that mana, which is great because it is a flying Death Toucher. It's really good to dissuade attacks on the defense. And those lands will stick around after you've activated the exhaust ability once. You don't actually need to have them stick on the board and be a Mana Dork. Additionally, if you do use this exhaust ability, you can always flicker it with blue flicker spells, or cycle it back through the command zone, having it die and then recast it for 4 mana to get the effect again, letting you double up on the ramp potential. I'm not sure how powerful that's actually going to end up being, because it is a lot of mana, but it is also a lot of ramp. Number 7, Slick Imitator. Slick Imitator is a 2 mana 1/3 blue ooze with Start Your Engines. Start Your Engines is the new mechanic that says if you have a card with Start Your Engines in play and you don't have speed, you start at 1 speed. Then, whenever your opponent loses life, during one of your turns specifically, you're going to go up to the next level of speed. Now, this only happens once per turn. Even if you hit all 3 of your opponents, you're only going to go up speed once. Even if you hit your opponent more than 1 time, you're only going to go up speed once. So, Start Your Engines is a mechanic that's all about getting to the max speed over the course of 3 or 4 turns. That is, 4 speed being the highest you speed can go, and most cards caring about max speed. Now, Start Your Engines is a really interesting mechanic from a Pauper Commander assessment standpoint. Maybe this is a bit too much inside baseball, but I found it really interesting to look at the cards and go, when is this useful? When is it too many hoops to jump through? Max speed reminds me of things like Threshold or Delirium. It's a thing you can work towards across your entire deck, and then once you have it, all of your cards that care about Delirium or Threshold are turned on. With this in mind, you can't actually work towards max speed until you've played at least 1 card with Start Your Engines. Since there aren't very many common cards with Start Your Engines, there's a few, there's some, but not enough for a whole deck, you really expect your commander to come down, start your engines, and then have to stick on the board for 3 or 4 turns before it actually is active. In this case, max speed has the ability, 1, sacrifice this creature, copy target spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. I absolutely love this effect. There's a lot of ways of copying instants and sorceries in this game, or a lot of ways of copying permanents on the battlefield. Being able to copy any spell that you have on the stack is huge, and for only 1 mana, it's very flexible. You can loop that into your turn well. What Slick Imitator has going for them is that it's, first of all, only 3 mana, which is really good for a clone, and you're only spending actual 1 mana on the turn of the copy. But additionally, when this dies, you can cast it again for 4 mana and copy another spell for only 1. That's a 5 mana clone, which is also extremely reasonable rate. I don't usually plan around my commander dying and being recasted, but going from 3 mana clone to 5 mana clone, still only 1 mana on the actual turn you're cloning it, is really, really good. Maybe I'm overhyping this, but I like this one a lot. I know I put it only at 7, but personally, this is the one I'm most excited about. Number 6, Embalmed Ascendant. This is a 3 mana white and black 1/2 zombie. It has Start Your Engines, and when this creature enters, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Once you hit max speed, whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. This one I wasn't sure about for a while if it made the cut. There's a decent number of cards that come down and give you this. When your creature you control dies, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. A lot of things do this, but this comes with a 2/2 body that you can sacrifice to start pinging people. The fact that it comes with extra body I think is a really powerful effect attached to this style of creature that wants to be doing aristocrats shenanigans anyway. Now, I do think that it might be a little bit awkward to play around max speed. Actually getting this down and having it last for a few turns before you get to start doing your aristocrats game plan might be too slow to make this really work, but I do think it has enough potential, and because of the intended game plan of this deck, you shouldn't find it difficult to actually drain your opponent's life once a turn to help you get there in the first place. Number 5, Transit Mage. Transit Mage is a 3-mana blue 2/2 human wizard with when this creature enters, you may search your library for an artifact card with mana value 4 or 5, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Yes, it is the final piece of the series of mages that find you artifacts. And being one that can find you something 4 or 5 gives this a lot of hits. As far as raw power, Transit Mage does not do a ton, but having a tutor in the command zone lets you have any other weird secret commander that you want that's a 4 or 5 artifact. Not only could you build around this effect itself by having an artifact-themed deck that you don't care what you're finding, but you always know you're going to be finding something interesting in the moment, or you could build around a specific 4 or 5 cost artifact that you want to make sure you have every game. Obviously, if you're looking for something at a different price point, go choose one of the other mages, but this does finish that series and gives us all of those options in our command zone for whatever you are looking to find. Number 4, Scrounging Skyray. Scrounging Skyray is a 2-mana 1/2 blue fish pirate with flying. Whenever you discard one or more cards, put that many +1/+1 counters on this creature. It also has cycling too, which probably won't be relevant because you cannot cycle from the command zone. This card really excites me, even though it is pretty simple. There's a ton of creatures that just get really big and hit you in the face, and having flying certainly helps them hit you, but it's still just a big Voltron commander, which isn't super exciting. We've seen that a million times before, but because it has a specific trigger, it gives us a build-around potential for our deck. This gives us a really good commander to say, let's build a Discard Matters deck and get additional value off of our Scrounging Skyray. Sure, you could go full in on Scrounging Skyray and just draw and discard for the sake of activating them, but it also means that we can have all those other discard payoffs in our 99 that we don't always get to play with, and that's really fun. Now, there was another card in the set that had the same effect, but it was a 1-mana 1/1 and didn't have flying. It was red, and while I think it has similar potential, that flying makes a huge difference, but additionally, it's in red. And red already has Evora Insatiable Air, a 2-mana 1/1 that grows whenever you discard a card. Evora Insatiable Air is probably the more powerful version of Scrounging Skyray, but since they're in different colors, they both have a reason to exist in the format, and I think both are perfectly reasonable, perfectly good commander options. Number 3, Lagrin, Soul of Alakria. This is a 2-mana white and green 1/1 beast mount with flying. It says whenever Lagrin attacks while saddled, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target mounts and or vehicles. It saddles for 1. Saddle is a mechanic from Outlaws of Thunder Junction, which says that you can tap other creatures to supply the saddle power, and then that becomes saddled, which is just a state that it checks for when it attacks. It took me a while to come around to this card. At first, I thought it was just a worse version of Miriam, which was from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. Now, I think Miriam is a very strong and very good card, and it's cool seeing more mount support so that it's not just a vehicle deck. But Miriam says give all of your mounts and vehicles +1/+1 whenever they attack, which seems way better than just 2 when Lagrin attacks. So while my first instinct was that Miriam is just better, so let's not even bother talking about Lagrin, I've come around to Lagrin because they themselves are a mount. Very often, there are cards that just say, when I attack, I get bigger, and those tend to be good enough commanders, very strong commanders, especially a 2-mana flyer that gets bigger whenever it attacks. Sure, you need to saddle this, but saddling only is going to cost you 1, so it shouldn't be too much work to make happen. It also has the benefit that whereas Miriam needs your mounts to be attacking to get them bigger, Lagrin can be the only one attacking and buff up the rest of your board until you think that they can reliably survive their own attacks, instead of Miriam needing to guarantee good attacks before they can start getting counters in the first place. Number 2, Cloudspire Coordinator. Cloudspire Coordinator is a 2-mana red and white 3/1 human pilot with when this creature enters, scry 2. It also has the ability tap, create X11 colorless pilot creature tokens, where X is the number of mounts and or vehicles that entered the battlefield under your control this turn. The pilot tokens have this benefit of being able to crew vehicles and saddle mounts as if their power was greater. So, what can we do with this? Generally speaking, the hurdle of vehicle decks are that you need a good combination of vehicles and creatures to crew those vehicles. With Cloudspire Coordinator, all we need is to have vehicles enter while Cloudspire Coordinator is on the field and able to tap, and then we can generate the necessary pilots for those vehicles. Meaning we could go full vehicles, no creatures except for Cloudspire, and it still might work. Maybe not, because it just could be some awkwardness. They are a 3/1, they can die if you don't protect them properly. So you still probably want some creatures, but it is an interesting thing to consider that they can just apply everyone you need. Additionally, you could go another route where you're playing less about the vehicles and mounts and more about the pilots. If you can get a couple vehicles into play on the same turn and then maybe flicker them or some other effect, you could get this number of X higher and higher and higher. And then you just need any form of untapper to be able to activate them multiple times in the same turn. It's going to be a bit of a build around, and I don't have a deck list for you, but I have done a little bit of looking, and I think there is some potential in this direction, at least as a sub-theme for an otherwise simple vehicle deck. All in all, I just think this one looks really, really cool, really, really good, and always having multiple colors in the command zone is excellent. Which brings us to our honorable mentions before number 1. First, we have Canyon Vaulter, which is a 2-mana 3/1 white core pilot. When they saddle a mount or crew a vehicle, it gives them flying until the end of the turn. The problem with this is that there's lots of other ways to just give all of your creatures flying. We have things like Aeronaut Admiral, a 4-mana 3/1 with flying that says vehicles you control have fly. It's doing the exact same thing, except for it doesn't hit mounts, and it's hitting all of them. Now, it is a lot more expensive, and it's the same stat line, so it might still be a little bit awkward, and Canyon Vaulter might still actually have a chance. Next is Guidelight Synergist, a 4-mana 0/4 white robot artificer with flying. It gets +1/+0 for each artifact you control. The problem with something like Guidelight Synergist is that it really pales in comparison to Cephalopod Sentry, a 4-mana white-blue star 5 with flying. The star, of course, being equal to the number of artifacts you control. And Cephalopod Sentry is just better. It's got more toughness, and it's got an extra color in its identity. Next is Pride of the Road, a 4-mana 2/5 white zombie cat warrior with vigilance. It also has Start Your Engines, and at max speed, the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature or vehicle you control gains double strike until end of turn. Now, there's a decent number of mono white commanders that can give out double strike. Honestly, I'm not sure if it's stronger or weaker than the other options. It's not a clear race. Erdnan, Dromoka Warrior, is a 2-mana 1/1 that hands out +1/+1 counters, and then whenever you attack, you get to give somebody who has 2 +1/+1 counters on them double strike for the end of the turn. Theoden, on the other hand, is 3 mana, 2/3, and has a red-white color identity, so to give you some more options. And it says whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, target creature gains double strike until end of turn. Lastly, there's Dualcraft Trainer, which is a 4-mana 3/3 white first striker that has Coven. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, target creature you control gains double strike until end of turn. So all of these effects require some hoop to jump through. Some are more complicated than others, and the question is max speed easier or harder? To me, the thing that stands out with Pride of the Road is that you're not starting your engines until turn 4 unless you're playing some other Start Your Engines card into 99, which there just aren't really enough at common in mono white to make that really expected. Then we have Risen Necro Regent, a 5-mana 5/4 zombie cat knight in mono black. They also have Start Your Engines, and again, 5 mana is just so late to get your engine started. Once you're at max speed though, at the beginning of your end step, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Commanders that make a token every turn are pretty common. There's a lot of them. They tend not to be high on my list just because we see them a lot. But a 2/2 zombie is both a relevant creature type and 2/2 instead of the usual 1/1. So there is some potential here. That said, I really think that starting your engines holds this card back from being actually playable. Lastly, we have Ooze Patrol, a 4-mana green 2/2 ooze. When this creature enters, mill 2 cards, then put a +1/+1 counter on this creature for each artifact and or creature card in your graveyard. This card is fascinating for a bunch of reasons. A 4-mana 2/2 that gets big, but it only gets big when you play it. You have to already have your bin full for this to come down and be huge, and then it's just a vanilla creature at that point. It's just a big guy, doesn't have trample, doesn't have any form of evasion. Could be fine. And if you care about milling yourself, could have extra potential. What it has to compete with, however, are a couple of newcomers to Pauper Commander from Innistrad Remastered. Now, I didn't do a review of Innistrad Remastered because there was only like 4 or 5 cards that even were contenders, let alone top 10 worthy. But these two that compete with Ooze Patrol, I think actually beat it out. Ghoultree is an 8-mana 10/10 that says it costs 1 less for each creature card in your graveyard. Now, it's not counting artifacts, which gives it a little bit of a downside. On the other hand, you have Splinterfright, also from Innistrad Remastered, and it is a 3-mana Star with Trample, so it's a little bit cheaper than Ooze Patrol. And the Stars, of course, are equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Once again, not counting artifacts, but it comes down and it's going to keep getting bigger. And it says at the beginning of your upkeep, mill 2 cards. So it'll continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Either way, both Splinterfright and Ghoultree look like absolutely great commanders, and I just wanted to make sure I pointed them out because I didn't have a chance with Innistrad Remaster. Definitely worth considering, and I think because of them, Cruise Control, that's not what it's called. And I think because of them, Ooze Patrol really doesn't make the mark. And with all that said, let's see my number 1 pick for Aetherdrift Pauper Commander. Number 1, Veteran Beast Rider, a 3-mana green and white 3/4 human knight with, at the beginning of your end step, untap each creature you control. Then it has the ability for 4 mana, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. There's so much you can do with this. Even if it's just Pseudo Vigilance, you can do a lot with this. You can use your creatures to power other effects that need you to tap down creatures or have tap abilities themselves. And of course, in green, you have access to all of the mana dorks that you would expect. Being able to tap all of those to pay for this ability, buffing up the rest of your board, and then still getting all of them back again so that your mana is up during your opponent's turn, and of course you have blockers, just adds up to being such a sweet card. All in all, Veteran Beast Rider just absolutely wins this for me. No questions asked. I knew it from the moment I saw it. That brings us to the end of Aetherdrift Top 10 Pauper Review, whatever I call this series. I've been Darcy Bits. I hope you have a great time. This set looks fantastic, and honestly, the commons look so good. I don't talk about commons in these videos because it's a lot, but the commons are great, actually. I'm really excited for Pauper in general, not just in the command zone. Have a good night, everyone. I've been Darcy Bits, and I will see you next time.